One of the biggest updates in the latest dust particles asset is we've now added 3D objects that can be used as particles. We've got some useful 3D objects included, but you can use your own if you like. With use custom objects enabled, we just then need to select a collection. So any objects we want to use as particles will need to be in that collection. For example, here I've got a couple of cushions from Polyhaven. They're in a collection called cushions that we can select in the pull down. And now these cushions are controlled by the particle system. We can go cushion mad if we like by adding loads of them. And then we can fly the camera around like it's an ad for shrimp furnishings. It's a natural evolution. So just to get the big picture, here we've got 2D particles and now we've got 3D particles. The 2D systems are actually pretty convincingly 3D, but that's just an illusion. They're really handy because they can render way faster. The 2D systems have been updated as well. Instead of planes, they now use these points that look a bit like diamonds here to hold the texture. And that texture should always orient towards the camera. Because of these points and because it's all happening in the shader, it should render and perform even faster than before. The 3D objects, on the other hand, are not points, of course, and so aren't quite as optimized. But because they are actually 3D polygonal objects, we can orbit completely around them. No illusion required. The way the master blend file is laid out is we've got all these numbered collections, which are the presets. There's a bunch of 2D ones which use the material, and you've probably guessed it, a bunch of 3D ones which use objects instead. If we select one, we should see in the 3D section that there's a collection with the needed objects for this preset that we have selected. In the Gen 3D Object Generators collection, that's where all the generators are, or 3D objects that we've made that have their own geometry nodes modifiers that increase the flexibility and variation of the object. We'll come back to that in a moment though. There's also this 3D flocks, swarms and clusters source collection. That's where all the collections are that we're using for the 3D object presets. For example, there's this cluster papers A collection, which is the collection that this preset number 25 is using. Inside that are several instances of the paper generator object, each with slightly different settings to randomize the look a bit. If you copy and paste the particle system into another blend file, everything necessary will come over automatically. In solid shading mode, we'll be able to see the generators off to the side. In rendered mode, they'll be invisible, but if I select one of these objects in the modifiers tab, I'll see its individual controls. If I enable the simple shader setting, then I will be able to see it in rendered mode, but it won't be affected by any of the shading parameters in the main particle system settings. That's what we mean by a simple shader. It allows us to easily see this object and how the parameters alter its look a bit easier than trying to see it flying around the scene as part of the particle system. On this particular generator for the paper, the controls we've kept pretty simple. Here we can affect the scale, choose the paper type, and adjust its style a little bit further. In the main 3D object settings of the particle system, we've got an option to use the textures color. That's going to preserve the variety of colors on the texture. Otherwise, it'll become monochrome and only use the colors from the shading section. Just a note here that this works because the object has a dust particle shader on it. The cushions earlier just had a simple shader, so the shading section in the particle system wouldn't have affected them. All the 3D object presets that we've included though are set up to be affected by the particle system shading. For align rotation with direction, that's a bit more useful for something like the birds, for example, as they're usually looking in the direction they're traveling. Otherwise, somewhat hilariously, they'll just look like they've been hurled up into the air by some unknown force, or like they're stuck in a tornado or something. The per axis rotation adds some randomness on that axis so that they don't all look aligned between themselves. That's useful for a simple asteroid field, for example. Lastly, we've got the deform section, which can be a big performance hit, so just keep that in mind. But it's very useful for things like paper, things that are typically pretty soft. The other controls are for the strength of the deformation and also the amount of detail in the deformation. High numbers are like high frequency noise, and low numbers are like large gusts of wind. In the main file, it's pretty easy to find the collections that are set up and used with the presets because they're the first that show up. All these green ones with call for collection at the end of the name. Though some of them will look a bit weird without the right particle settings, which is why it's probably best to start with the presets and build from there in most cases. It's probably best not to alter the presets in this main file though, but it's pretty easy to make more. Just to show it from scratch, I'll start with this simple default 2D blended particle system. and copy it with Control-C and paste it into a fresh blend file with Control-V. Let's choose a generator to use. For example, a bee perhaps. So again, Control-C to copy and Control-V to paste. I'll create a collection for the bee particles using the C key in the outliner and place the bee generator object inside there. Then I'll select the particle system, enable the use custom objects and choose that bees collection. We should finally see all the particles are now our bee. If we want to change the look of our bee, then tweak the settings. If we want more variety than just this one bee, we can duplicate it and then change its settings. And now these two bees will be randomly populated throughout the particle system. Then we can go to the main particle system settings and change whatever we like to get that sort of look we might be going for. And that's all there is to it. Space bees. Someone pitch it to Netflix.